podcast series featuring conversations with professional creatives from the arts, entertainment, and media industries. Here we explore various approaches to craft and career and even consider how those two can sometimes work together. I'm Derek Webster, Senior Associate Director for Creative Careers at Yale's Office of Career Strategy, and it's my pleasure to be returning for the second part of our interview with New York-based artist, creative director, designer, and producer Asher Young. Asher, it's so great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So we got such a great scope and introduction to the different elements that you've been involved in the last time that we talked. I was wondering too, though, like we didn't have as much time as I sometimes like to give you the chance to give us some sort of, perspective, advice. We're going to have we've got a wide viewership, but also a lot of Yale undergrads that are listening and wanting to know a little bit more about like practically, tangibly, how do I make these things happen? What does this look like? So let's go ahead and start in that direction. And if you could, maybe we'll start just in big scope version. Like if you had the one piece of advice that you could have told yourself as a senior graduating from Yale, like here's what I wish you knew, what would it be? Like what? And let's make it specific to assuming someone is interested in following down similar lines of where you've gone.
I would say it's about surviving. And I know that, and I don't mean it so dramatically. I actually mean it in the context of if this is something you want to do, like just speaking for myself, like I know that I will be constantly desiring to create new things and following my own artistic passions. That's not the question, right? The question becomes being able to create an environment for yourself that you can continue to exist and make those things happen so that you can exist long enough so that all of a sudden people know who you are, right? It doesn't happen overnight. And I'm like, and part of this is just to say, no one tells you the practice of making art is making art long enough, right? Like that is like functionally what the advice is, right? Why I use the word surviving is because that can mean many different things for people, right? That is sometimes taking a job on the side. Sometimes that is doing a project that may not be 100% what you want to do, but like you do it because you meet someone and maybe you just don't use that project in your portfolio. There's many projects I don't use in my portfolio at all, but I use it to meet someone who I'm like, now we have a good relationship with. So I think the surviving piece, I think is something I would have said, be like, that is the thing that matters because I know Asher, your artistic center, like that is not going to be the thing you're going to worry about. It's going to be about getting to the point where that is continually the thing you're able to do.
I like that. Yeah. The sustainability of process. Yeah. And I like too, that the way of thinking, particularly because I mean, artists in general, like we have moments where we wonder, we second guess and those sorts, but at core, we have a lot of passionate connection with our artistic practice. And so that part is probably not going to wane, right? Like there'll be the complications that surround that. So the idea that if you can just keep it, the engine moving long enough to get that load to the, where it's supposed to go. I like that. I like that way of looking at it.
And you're totally right. Like, exactly. It's not, there are days where I'm like, everyone waffles, like that's totally natural. But like, if you just keep going, you look around and you're like, oh, I'm here. Not that I've made it, but like now there's like a group of people in my cohort. Okay, we started supporting each other, and then you like keep and then move forward a couple of years. I mean, like it's just about that.
I like that too, because I mean, what you just said puts it back. We talked last time about community of practice, and you mentioned how integral that is. And one reason that's so integral, that community is what keeps you moving on the bad days. That they tend to be the ones, and you do the same thing. You pick the other person up, they pick you up, and it keeps you moving forward in a really healthy way. That's great. Great advice. I wish I would have gotten as a senior. Yeah.
No one gave it to me. So,
but now you're giving it to a whole new generation, which is great. Okay. So with the same kind of like retrospective in mind, what is one, particularly early in the process, as you were escaping Yale and going, into these brave new worlds, what was one, I'll say mistake, but it could just be a decision that, to do again, or you want someone else to avoid making that kind of mistake? What would that be?
I would say, I think I'm going to be abstract because I think it's important not to name specific people in this, but I think the thing that mistake is, when you're younger, you model behavior, right? As with people who are successful, and you think that is the thing that brought them success, right? And not necessarily having space to understand that like that is just a function of who they are and where they came from. And so, I'm when I say mistake, I think it's more of just like I wasn't self-aware enough in that moment to say like, I can move through this environment in a different way on my own terms. Right. And I think none of it was like catastrophic or anything like that, but how do you want to move through a given space? Because yes, you are often representing other people or other people's interests, but at the end of the day, it is you and you have to preserve that. And I think those, as we talk about practice, community of practice, like you have to bring along the people and people also want to have to come along with you. Right. And so I think that is a sort of a high level thing that I look back on is I wish I learned that faster. Right. Is that like the environment which you're in is not necessarily an environment of the rest of the situation.
Okay. No, that's good. And yeah, keeping healthy perspective in mind in all of this, I think is helpful and not easy to do, particularly when you're younger. And as you said, you're kind of reaching out, you're assuming like, oh, that person, they're successful. They did it that way. I must do it that way as well. I think there's a lot of, in a healthy way in the modern artistic and entertainment related landscapes, there's a lot of rethinking of the things that looked like they were the right ways before, definitely not the right ways. And
I would say, I think where it's hard and particularly, so it's like when it's like unacceptable is very clear. Do you know what I mean? But when there is just ways that are better, I think that's when it's really hard, right? When it's unacceptable, like the lines are clear, people will start vocalizing that kind of stuff. But it's more just like making an active decision about it, how you want to move through space, And so I think that is like the part that is because it's that it's not that it's bad. It's just sort of like, are you taking an active decision about that or are you being passive in that interaction?
Yeah, I like that. Okay. So and again, we've gone back a few different times talking about like your industry and what you're a part of. And to be honest, like you skew in a lot of different directions. Like you're touching a lot of different. So maybe as a mix, give us a bit more of a sense of the landscape that you think of when I say, the industries that you're a part of, and then also the current trends in those industries that young creatives might want to know about.
Amazing. I think we'll have to go one by one.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think I am interested in the immersive theater world, right? I think 10 years ago, Sleep No More, all that kind of stuff was the big trend and became like a huge defining moment in the immersive theater world. Punch Drunk are incredible and they continue to do so, their own work all over the world. I think in that context, the trends that are exciting to me are people taking that practice and applying it to different disciplines, right? So we're working on something with a hotel, right? And that becomes interesting, right? Like, how do you think of a closed ecosystem in the context of immersive theater, right? All of a sudden, those things become interesting. So taking those principles and applying them to different spaces through the lens of theater is actually very exciting to me. Because in my opinion, like the things that, like the grandfathers of the Sleep Knowers and things like that, they exist, right? And I'm so happy they exist. So now what's coming next, right? Like those are the questions that I have. In the music world, it's hard to say because there's so many different types of artists and things out there. But I am personally finding the best collaborations are the ones who are interested in more narrative and more art-based work. And that's sort of where we have been spending our time, right? There's a whole other category of people who are focusing on scale and things like that. But where we are is, how do you take a normal concert and sort of change it on its head or change a different, what is the role of an artist? The role is not just music. It is also curator. It's also all this other things. In like the installation space, I feel like it's about meaning. It's about things that are meaningful, right? I think we've seen the promulgation of a bunch of stuff that is Instagram based, right? And that is more of the marketing world, which I am not a part of, but even things like Super Blue out there, which is Pace Galleries, audience-based exhibits that are, has James Turrell as Devlin, things like that. We're starting to see the merging of artists and audience work in that way. So that to me is very exciting, right? Like the art world is paying close enough attention to that overlap in sort of a serious way, right? And serious can mean critically, can also mean monetarily. Like it's now like a big focus in a different way than it was. I think that's a good 3 levels. I mean, there's many more.
Of course, but that's a nice bite that we've taken out of the apple. So, okay. So what do you use on a daily, weekly basis? And you probably use some very custom and networked kind of things, but like, what do you use in a publicly accessible way to like follow trends, to know where market's going, to know where creatives, what they're doing? Like, what are some of the publications, the online resources? Like, what would you recommend?
What do I do? I think there are a couple of things. There's like in the immersive theater world, there's something called No Proscenium, which is run by Noah Nelson, which is an incredible resource. They are across the country and all over the place. They tend to review things and say a bunch of opportunities that are available. I think they're really doing a great job. How do I find things? You know, I am on Instagram, but I don't really it's a funny relationship. I'm on it for work purposes, but I'm not on it for personal purposes. And so I find that I get a lot of my visual references from a lot of like art blogs, whether it be something as just visually exciting as like, this is colossal, where they keep posting incredible projects, or it's something like the New York Times is like art section. Like those are the categories. I would also say the thing that secretly feeds a lot of stuff is Google alerts. And I know that seems really boring, but I have a lot of Google alerts set for a lot of specific things. So not just like new theater, right? Or it's like an artist I like, or there's a gallery in this place, or this new hologram, right? Like random things. Yeah. And that comes into my inbox every day and I read it. And you know, 95% of it is useless, but there's 5% that all of a sudden becomes interesting. Because I'm not, while I have like magazines and a bunch of those kinds of materials that come through my life, it's also interesting to see just like what is pushing through, you know, in a sort of wide scale screen kind of way.
That's great. Also, probably those alerts are probably feeding your algorithm too, just in terms of every time you get on Google, it probably is giving you interesting slices of return.
It's true, except I have a different Google account because of that purpose.
Okay. So, so you're, that's actually a smart way to keep, completely separated.
Yeah, totally. And I would say, I think the other thing that I do is like, I think everyone does this, their community are like, I am constantly asking people what's the weirdest thing. And then as your friends get, and I say weird is a good thing, as your friends get more and more specific in their work, that specificity is helpful, right? Like I was at a bar with this bartender who I'm working with, and he made a key lime pie drink, and it's using winter melon to create the pie crust taste. Do you know what I mean? And so like, to me, that's like, what's a winter melon? Where does that come from? That's so exciting. Like that kind of thing. The more niche people are, I think that's the better sources they have.
Great. Yeah. Okay. So then let's put ourselves back in the perspective of a young undergrad who's interested in everything you've been saying, taking notes, trying to figure out like how to carve my way into this channel. And then would love to hear more about, okay, then like what are the skills? What are the platforms? What are the softwares? What are the types of things that I should be engaging with? You were a computing and the arts major, which even, that's been a growing major, by the way. I don't know. It's far more popular than it used to be. So there's much more carryover in those directions. So there's actually a decent number of people who are at Yale thinking about some of the same things that you're thinking about. How should they be carving this out for themselves in terms of their, again, practice, exercise, but also just the technologies behind some of this that they need to be aware of at the very least, if not working in?
I think first question is an honest reflection for the individual of like, do you enjoy the technical, right, as primary, or do you enjoy the conceptual as primary? And not to say you have to be one or the other, but understanding where's your center, because I think that informs what skills you take on, right? So in my life, the technical is just a means to the end of what the thing I was trying to create. And so while I have a great appreciation for it and I love it, it is not where I start, and it's not at all what takes a lot of my mental space. For example, living memory, which is the new iteration of the hologram that I started at Yale, that comes from a place of how do we accurately represent memory? Now, oh my gosh, how do we back through the tech stack to make that happen? I know how to do this and this, but I have to call these six other people to do these other things. So I would say is first identify within yourself today, and this can change later, where are you excited about? And if it's more technical, I would say find the things that are exciting to you, right? That, for example, all of a sudden everyone discovered Unreal Engine over the pandemic, right? And it has the ability to create the incredibly realistic renderings and things like that. And now I want people in my life that can do that, right? Because I can putz around on it, but that's not my skill set, right? That's an example, right? Not to say that Unreal Engine is the best thing ever, whatever, but it's free. And all of a sudden now you have a huge skill set that people don't have, and a different generation did not spend the hours to invest in, right? That's if you're like a technically minded person, right? The other side of it is if you're more interested in like the story or the narrative or the reference-based stuff, I would say just surround yourself with that material, right? You know, and that part's where I get really happy is like going to museums or researching the materials, go nerd out about the Ghost Army, right? And learn about who made those tanks and why they're there. Or what about Yufan, like a Korean painter, like those kinds of things. If those are exciting to you, like then follow those things, because I think both of those categories are equally valuable, and you will have space to use your word channel. Like they're both critically important, right? And sometimes that is like Photoshop, being able to make incredible things on Photoshop. And sometimes that is saying, why are we making it? Like, and I think those are both valuable, but even if you have the reference stuff, you still have to be able to create things. Like, I don't think in my world, I could do anything if I was just conceptual. You always have to be able to bring it to a reality, even if it's just a representation of reality for others to try to understand, you know?
Fantastic. No, that's a great self-reflection, right? Like, and I like the way that you're kind of parsing between the more technical side of things and the more, I don't know, observant or categorical kind of things, or strategic kind of approach. But it sounds like in the worlds that you're walking, it sounds like you need a little bit of both. And that's kind of almost by definition that what you're doing, whether it's, you know, some projects will be more of one and more of the other, but it sounds like those are both elements within the scope of what you're doing.
Absolutely. And part of it is also just being able to weed through the collaborators too, right? And when I say weed through, it's not good or bad. It's just like, can you accomplish the thing we need, right? And that is like being able to say, okay, I need to create a giant 75-foot inflatable octopus, right? Who can do that? I don't think you can do that. Like, oh, you can do that. Great. You've designed a thing. It looks beautiful, but do you know how it happens? No, you don't. Okay, maybe we need a different designer. Like, you know, that's like really part of it, not to be able to go back and forth and sort of know enough to be dangerous to make some quick calls about what has to happen. You know?
All right. Okay. So we'd love to hear you mentioned a few different projects, but some of it's in past tense. We'd love to hear more future tense, like what's on the horizon, what's the exciting stuff that we want to share, we want to know about, and anything you've got, we'll definitely drop into the chat below. So where can we point people to find you and find your stuff?
So what's happening this year? This new things that are coming is we're doing that hologram that we've talked about that I started at Yale. There's a new version of it called Living Memory that's coming up this May, the beginning of May in Battery Park. That'll be there for a couple of days, just as a little R&D session for us, which will be fun. It's part of an Illumination Festival, which will be great. The other thing that we're doing coming up this spring and summer is we're doing an immersive dinner show for Richard Branson's Virgin Voyages that has been many, many years in the making and is coming back this year. So that should be up and running by June. We'll see, you know, as these things go, it's always a big process and we're super excited about that. So that has like food, circus, and a bunch of other stuff. And so those are the two main things. And other things are like, we have some things with museums and other stuff that are coming up, but those timelines are so much longer. So those are the two coming up right now. And if there are more, I'll send them your way. We might have some salons and things like that happening.
Perfect. Anything you got, send it our way and we'll drop it in.
Amazing.
Asher, as always, it's been such a pleasure. Thanks for kind of tracking industry and split industries and multi-industries, but also just being honest in the assessment of what's happening and also giving some great advice along the way. It's been fantastic.
Oh, thank you for having me. I think the most important thing is forward is like the only way to think about it, right? Like forward every day. And so I appreciate talking to you every day about it.
Stay in touch. I'm sure at some point we'll have you back.
Sounds good.
Thanks again, Asher. And that's all for now for the Craft and Career Podcast. But keep an ear out for our next conversation with Yale alumna, educator, and musical theater performer, Zena Ellis. Until then, don't be afraid to use the word career, but always stay crafty.